sallallahu alayhi wasallam had started preaching about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala openly by now. Fearing Prophet's uncle, Quraysh leaders had stopped persecuting the Muslims for a while, but soon they were angry again. A group of them went to his uncle, Abu Talib, who had promised to protect him. They told him to ask the Prophet to stop attacking their gods and their way of life. They threatened to harm him if he did not stop. Abu Talib was very upset by this quarrel among his people, but he could not break his word to his nephew. When he told the Prophet about the incident, the Prophet answered, "O my uncle, by Allah, if they put the sun in my right hand and the moon in my left in return for me giving up this cause, I would not give it up until Allah makes truth victorious or I die in his service." Abu Talib was deeply moved by his answer. He told him that he would support him for as long as he lived and encourage him to go on spreading Allah's message. From that time on, however hard the leaders of Quraysh tried to convince Abu Talib to stop protecting his nephew, he always refused to listen to them. In order to get rid of the Prophet and his followers, his enemies started persecuting those Muslims who were poor or weak or had no powerful friends. One such person was Bilal, the slave of Umayyah ibn Khalaf. His master would take him out into the desert, tie him up, and leave him in the sun with a large stone on his chest. Fortunately, Abu Bakr was passing by one day and saw Umayyah torturing Bilal, so he bought him from his master for a large sum of money and then set him free. But not all persecuted Muslims were as fortunate as Bilal. Many suffered, but all of them endured it patiently, knowing that they were doing the right thing and that their reward in the life to come would be greater than any happiness they could find on earth. As the number of the Prophet's followers increased, so the enemies of the Muslims grew more and more angry. When the oppression of the Quraysh became so severe, the Prophet advised believers to leave Mecca and migrate to Abyssinia, the modern-day Ethiopia. Abyssinia, he told them, was ruled by a Christian king, Negus, who did not persecute anyone based on their beliefs. The Prophet asked believers to stay there till God showed them an alternative solution to their problem. The Muslims prepared for the journey. They decided to wait until night so that they could leave without being seen. The first 16 left Mecca and, after reaching the shore of the dead Red Sea, crossed over to Abyssinia. Another 83 men and 19 women followed, all hoping to be welcomed by the king and people of that country. This was the first hijrah, or migration, in Islam. The Meccans were furious when they discovered that these Muslims had secretly left the city. Among them were the sons and daughters of many of the leading families of Mecca. The anger of the Meccans was even greater when they found out that the Muslims had been warmly welcomed in Abyssinia. They discussed the matter among themselves and sent two of their men, Amr ibn al-As and Abdullah ibn Abi Rabi'ah, to Abyssinia. They were to persuade the king to send the Muslims back. They met with the king's courtiers and bribed them so that they speak in their favor before the king. After this, they entered the court of Negus, the king of Abyssinia, and first presented their gifts. Then they requested the king to expel the immigrants. They claimed that the Muslims invented a religion that opposed theirs and that of the Negus. The king looked toward his advisors, who had already been bribed. They said, "O king, they speak the truth. Their own people know them better and are better acquainted with what they have done, so that they themselves might judge them." The king was very angry with this response. He declared he won't surrender the immigrants to anyone until he himself had the chance to question them. After this, the king ordered that the Meccan believers who were living in his land be brought into his court. When these believers were presented before the king, contrary to the local custom, they did not prostrate before him. "Why do you not kneel before our king?" they were asked by one of the advisors. "We kneel only to Allah," they replied. The king was now curious, so he asked them to tell him about their religion. Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, a cousin of the Prophet, stepped forward to speak to Negus. With his eloquence and wisdom, Ja'far spoke to the Negus saying, "O king, we were a people in a state of ignorance and immorality, worshipping idols and eating the flesh of dead animals, committing all sorts of abomination and shameful deeds, breaking the ties of kinship, treating guests badly, and the strong among us exploited the weak. We remained in this state until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent us a prophet, one of our own people, whose lineage, truthfulness, trustworthiness, and integrity were well known to us. He called us to worship Allah alone and to renounce the stones and the idols. He ordered us to pray, to give him alms, and to fast. The Meccans began to attack us and come between us and our religion. So we had to leave our homes, and we have come to you, hoping to find justice." As a Christian, the king was very much impressed by these words. He asked the Muslims to recite something from their holy book, the Quran. Ja'far recited the opening verses of Surah Maryam, a chapter which relates the story of the birth of both Yahya alayhi salam and Jesus alayhi salam, as well as a remembrance of how Maryam alayhi salam, out of her pity, was miraculously fed with food. Upon hearing the recital, the king, along with the advisors, were moved to tears. The tears rolled down his cheeks, wetting his beard. He exclaimed, "It seems as if these words and those which were revealed to Jesus are the rays of the light which have radiated from the same source." Turning to the two envoys from Mecca, he said, "I am afraid I cannot give you back these refugees. They are free to live and worship in my realm as they please." The gifts which the envoy has brought with them were returned and they were sent away. The two Meccans returned home, bitterly disappointed. Thus the Muslims lived in Abyssinia undisturbed for a number of years, till they returned to Medina. Eventually, the Prophet invited Negus to Islam, and in response, the king confessed his faith in Islam and wrote the following reply to the Prophet: "In the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful."